Okay, so today we're diving into a really tragic story, one with a legal outcome that's just perplexing. It's a case that really makes you think about where the line is between intent, coercion, and consequence. And believe it or not, it all comes down to a single fateful car ride. So, let's get into it. So, here's the central question, the paradox we're going to try and unpack here. You have a young woman who dies after jumping from a moving car, but the driver, he gets acquitted of kidnapping? I mean, how is that even possible? It sounds contradictory, right? To get to the bottom of the verdict, we've got to go back and understand exactly what happened. All right, before we get into all the legal arguments and the back and forth, let's start with the one thing that nobody, absolutely nobody, disputes: the tragic outcome. And here it is, just the heartbreaking, undeniable fact. A young woman named Rasha died from injuries she got after jumping out of a moving car. She was a university student, and she made a desperate choice that ultimately ended her life. You have to remember everything in this case: the accusations, the defense strategy, the final verdict. It all grows out of this one single, irreversible moment. So, to really understand how things could go so horribly wrong, we need to look at the two people at the very heart of this story: Qusai and Rasha, and crucially, the wildly different ways they saw their relationship. And this is really the core of the whole conflict. It's like they were living in two different realities. On one side, you have Qusai. He thought he was madly in love, but that feeling was all tangled up with this deep sense of inferiority, especially about money. Now on the other side, you have Risha. For her, he was just a colleague, a friend. That's it. She was engaged to someone else, a guy who was financially well off. See, this wasn't really a love triangle. It was more like a collision between one person's delusion and another person's reality. So what happens next? Well, Qusai finds out Rasha is getting married, and for him, his entire world just shudders. This wasn't just about losing a woman he thought he loved. No, for him, it was like confirmation of all his worst fears. And that feeling of rejection, that's what tipped him over the edge, pushing his obsession into a really desperate and, in the end, tragic plan. And make no mistake, this wasn't something that just happened on the spur of the moment. Oh no, there was a plan. First, he hears about the engagement. Then, he ropes his friend Sim into it. Then the two of them go and borrow a car, and this is a really key detail, right? It was almost certainly meant to make him look like he had a status he didn't, all to impress her. And the final step, in his mind at least, was to confront her and propose. Okay, so this brings us to the day it all happened. The day Qusai decided to put his plan into action. And in doing so, he set off a chain of events that would end in just absolute tragedy. So what does he do? He waits for her right outside her university, a place he knows she has to be. And he insists on giving her a ride in that borrowed car. The pressure starts right then and there. It's one of those offers that's really hard to say no to without making a big, awkward scene. The second she gets in that car, everything changes. The dynamic completely shifts. It's no longer a public sidewalk. It's a small, enclosed space that he controls. And right away, Qusai starts driving recklessly. He's literally using the car as a weapon, as a tool for intimidation, all while he's trying to force her to call off her engagement and marry him. Just imagine how she felt. Rasha is trapped. He won't stop the car. He won't stop badgering her. She starts to feel like she's in real physical danger. And in her desperation, she gives him a very, very clear warning: stop this car or I will jump out. And this right here is the critical moment, the fatal misjudgment. Qusai hears her. He hears the threat, but he just doesn't believe her. He thinks it's a bluff, just a tactic to get him to pull over. He completely dismisses how desperate she truly is. So he keeps driving, and he keeps up the pressure. And so, feeling like she had no other choice, no other way out, Rasha does what she said she would do. She acts on her threat. She opens the door of that moving car, and she jumps. It was the last desperate thing she could do to escape a situation that must have felt completely inescapable. And tragically, the injuries were fatal. So, what happens after such a tragedy? A court case. And this case would hinge on two totally different ways of looking at what happened inside that car. You had the prosecution painting one picture, and the defense painting a completely different one. The whole trial really boiled down to two key moments. First, her getting into the car. Was that the start of a kidnapping plot like the prosecution said? Or was it just a voluntary act in broad daylight like the defense argued? And second, the jump itself. Was it an act of pure desperation, her only choice? Or was it a singular, independent decision that kind of broke the chain of events? The entire verdict was going to hang on how the court saw these two moments. So let's dig into the prosecution side of things. They basically argued that Qusai's actions, the crazy driving, the relentless pressure, created a situation of such extreme stress that Rasha's jump wasn't a choice to die, but a choice to escape. From their point of view, Qusai was directly responsible for her death because he backed her into a corner and left her with no other way out. Now, the defense team, they had a different strategy. They tried to break that chain of cause and effect. Their argument was, okay, maybe Qusai created a stressful situation, but the final act, the decision to open that door and jump, that was Rasha's and Rasha's alone. They framed it as this singular act of free will, a tragic act, sure, but one that was ultimately her own, not something Qusai legally made her do. All right, so you've got these two completely opposite stories. How on earth did the court decide? Well, this brings us right back to that paradox from the beginning. The verdict is where we find the answer to how he could be held responsible for her death, yet still be found not guilty of kidnapping. So here's the final decision. It was kind of a split verdict. Both Qusai and his friend Jassim were found not guilty of kidnapping. But, and this is a huge but, they weren't let off the hook completely. The court found them guilty of something else, causing the death of the victim. And that distinction, right there, is the absolute key to understanding this whole case. And the sentence he received for causing the death of a young woman? Just 2 years in prison. So you're probably wondering, how did the court land here? Well, here's the breakdown. The kidnapping charge didn't stick because, legally speaking, the act started the moment Rasha got in the car, and the court decided she did that voluntarily. There was no force or trickery at that initial point. But that didn't get Qusai off the hook. The court said his actions after she was inside, the reckless driving, the intense pressure, created such a terrifying situation that her trying to escape was a direct, and you could even say a foreseeable result. So the bottom line was, he didn't technically kidnap her, but his actions, his coercion, directly caused her death. And that's where this case leaves us, with this really profound and honestly unsettling question. It shows us that in the eyes of the law, someone can create the exact circumstances that lead to a horrible tragedy, but still not be guilty of the worst possible crime. And it really forces you to think, right? When one person's desperate plan causes another person to commit a desperate act, where does responsibility, both legal and moral, really begin? And where does it end?